So we have made it to the midpoint of 2025, which means that you are about to see a lot of juicy mid-year content in your sub box. But before we get to that, we need to talk about June. So June was the most average reading month I think I've had for the entire year. I did not have any 5-star reads, but I also didn't hate anything that I read. I didn't read the most, but I'm also not disappointed by the amount that I read. I did read slightly less books than maybe I typically do in a month, but the amount of pages was still, like everything else, perfectly average. So I guess we'll talk about it. Let's get straight into the stats, shall we? So in June, I read 7 books, which added up to 3,493 pages and broke down to an average of 116 pages per day. For the star ratings, I had 1 2-star read, 3 3-stars, and 3 4-stars, which broke down to an average of 3.28 stars per book. For the demographics, I had 4 adult books and 3 young adults. For the formats, I read 3 standardly formatted novels, 2 ebooks, and I listened to 2 audiobooks. For the genres, I read 3 fantasy books, 2 fantasy romance, 1 romance, and 1 science fiction. And finally, for the places where I sourced these books from, 5 of them were from my own TBR that existed prior to the start of 2025. 1 was a library book and 1 was from Audible. So I actually started the month off really strong and I was reading pretty quickly. The first book that I finished is one of my favorite books of the month, and actually the first and the last books that I read in June I think were my 2 favorites. The first one was This Poison Heart by Everand, which completely took me by surprise. This is a book that I've owned for a very long time. I got it from an Illumicrate I think in 2021, and I never thought that Everand's books were for me. Her slasher novel is a little bit interesting because I like young adult slashers and thrillers, but her fantasy has never really appealed to me. So when I picked this up, I really thought it was going to be a middle of the road 3-star read. However, I really fell in love with this. It does fall into the category of young adult that I enjoy in fantasy. There's a very kind of, it's not super niche, but there is a subgenre of young adult fantasy that I eat up, and that is contemporary fantasy set in our world where the magic is of an occult nature. So things like psychics, witches, typically with a spooky autumnal atmosphere. And this is following a young girl called Bree who lives in Brooklyn with her adoptive parents. One day, a woman comes to their house and tells Bree that she is about to inherit an estate from her aunt. Her family is struggling at the minute because the rent prices keep going up on the flower shop that they run, as well as the apartment that they live in above it. So Bree has been helping out a lot, pretty much free of charge, just to help the shop take over and help out her family. So when they realize that they've inherited this estate, first of all, they don't actually know what it is. It could be a box of old junk or it could be a sprawling manor, but they decide that they are going to head upstate to explore. So when they arrive, they discover that Bree has indeed inherited this sprawling, crumbling gothic mansion. And one of the first things they notice when they enter this house is that it has an apothecary that is stocked with tons and tons of herbs, but not only herbs, poisons. And deep within the garden, they find a bunch of greenhouses, not only to grow the herbs for the apothecary, but behind that, they also find a poison garden. Bree herself does have a magical ability that her parents do know about that she has been struggling with, where she makes plants grow, and everywhere she goes, like the nature kind of bends towards her, and it's become something that people notice and feel a little weird around her because of, and it's really made her feel ostracized. So going to this mansion, which is kind of in the middle of nowhere, it's in a tiny town, getting a fresh start, but also being able to explore her power in a way that does not endanger people and where people aren't constantly looking at her and seeing it happen, is really, really freeing for her. But as we go further into this book and she encounters more people in this small town and people keep turning up on her doorstep asking her about her apothecary, she discovers that there may be a little bit more to what she has inherited and her family legacy than she initially knew. And it goes into Greek mythology as well, which is something, I mean, the names of the characters in this family very much lean that way, but it's not something that I anticipated from the synopsis synopsis of this book. The synopsis is actually quite vague. It says that she inherits this estate and it has a poison garden and pretty much leaves it there. But I was very shocked by how quickly I fell into this. It definitely has its flaws. I gave this 4 stars overall. I think that the ending was a little bit chaotic, a little bit jarring, too many things happening at once. And I also found some of the dialogue to be quite cheesy in here, especially between Brie and her parents. She has adoptive mothers and they are very, very supportive. It is a very strong, tight family unit, which is great to see in a young adult novel. But the way that they talk to each other sometimes is just a little bit cringe, like it's a little bit too much. But I really liked the atmosphere of this. I liked the magic. I feel like Kaylin Bayron did a good job researching plants to make it feel realistic that the character actually knew about plants and was knowledgeable because she'd started to study it because of her ability that she had. So I feel like it helped me to sink into the book and that added a level of realism to it. And overall, I just had a really good time. I don't have a physical copy of the second book. It's a duology, but I am going on holiday soon and I know it's available on Libby, so I might add it to my Kindle for the trip because I feel like while I did really enjoy this, if it gets to a point where I leave this series too long and I have to reread it, it might take me a little while to circle back around to actually finishing this one out. I then read Twisted Love by Anna Huang, and this is one that I went into with a great deal of trepidation because I'd heard very middle of the road things about it. Like, I know that Anna Huang is a very, very popular contemporary romance author, but I've also heard that a lot of people really don't like this book. I fall like kind of middle of the road on it. I didn't love this book by any means, but I do really like Anna Huang's writing style, and I was about to DNF halfway through this, but this surprise plot kind of comes out of nowhere and it's like really crazy and dramatic, which kind of kept me hooked through to the end. This one is following a young woman who is at college and her brother is not her main caretaker because she's pretty much an adult, but he's always looked out for her. He's always been the main person in her family that she can depend on because her mother died when she was younger and she doesn't have the best relationship with her father. But her brother is moving to Central America for a year. I think he's training to be a doctor or something and he's gone to do work in Central America. So he asks his best friend to just look in on his sister, make sure that she's all right, and he takes this job very, very seriously, which is where a lot of people, myself included, have an issue with the romance because it's kind of controlling and overbearing in the things that he protects her from, which are quite safe decisions that she has decided to make on her own behalf as an adult. These two know that they can't be together because, I mean, they don't even like each other really. I put it in quotation marks because obviously there's an attraction there, and this does go quite quickly into lust before they kind of have romantic feelings, but they start to become attracted to each other as they spend more and more time together, but they don't want to jeopardize their relationship with Ava's brother. Alex is obviously his best friend, and there's also some stuff going on in the background because Alex's parents were murdered and he is trying to take down the person who was responsible for their death. He's never been somebody to form attachments anyway. He's quite cold, he's quite aloof, but he definitely does not need somebody that he cares about getting in the way of his revenge mission. The romance, I just never really got on with it. It was fine, and I do find Anna Huang's writing really compelling and really easy to read, which for me, I love in a romance. There are other romance authors where I don't really care too much about the romantic relationships, but I find the plot reasonably entertaining and it's just really compelling writing where you can keep turning pages. Anna Huang definitely has that style, but then halfway through as I was starting to get bored, that's pretty much where the smut kicks in as well. And because I wasn't vibing with the romance, I was like, okay, I could take or leave this. Like, I'm not having a great time. Then we started to get the plot twist come in, and honestly, it was like a soap opera. You guys know that I love me some really toxic, entertaining romances where the plot twists are wild and make no sense or would never happen in real life, but it is like just a great time. And this definitely delivered on that front within the plot. So at this point, I didn't love this book, but I would definitely be open to reading more from Anna Huang in the future. I will probably continue on with this series. However, they are all available on Kindle Unlimited, so I won't be collecting any physical copies. And then moving on to some of Anna Huang's other series, which I I know are generally a lot better received. The reason why my page count was so high despite only reading 7 books is because I read A Memory of Light by Robert Jordan in June. I finally finished Wheel of Time, and boy, was this not worth it. It's not even the best one in the series. It's actually, for the most part, it's actually one of the most forgettable ones in the series for me because of how battle heavy the content is in this book. Like, it lost me almost immediately. So if you guys are unfamiliar with Wheel of Time, it is a classic high fantasy series, one of the most well-known, most read, well-regarded classic high fantasy series that has influenced the genre for decades. And it is set in this world where everything happens over and over again. There is something called the pattern and the weave of the world, which is the pattern of events that happen in every age, and every time the wheel turns and the age passes, the same events happen over and over again. Now, in every age, there are a handful of key figures. I just remembered the very end of this book and now I'm angry. There's a handful of key figures in every age who can alter the pattern of the world and actually make change within the weave of the world. And we are following some of those. So the main one is the Dragon Reborn, who is a figure reincarnated into every age to essentially play as a pawn for the forces of light and dark. And we're following him as he tries to tip the world to light for good, as well as some of his friends who are Tarvarin, which are those people who have the ability to alter the pattern of the world. Now, this is a multi-cast series. There are probably hundreds of characters across the series because some play very small parts, but predominantly we are following the Tarvarin, the people associated with them, and also the Dragon Reborn. And my issue with this book in particular is that it is entirely a battle, literally wall to wall a battle. Maybe the last 50 pages is the aftermath of the battle, but the criticism that I had of book 13 was that Brandon Sanderson, who took over this series after Robert Jordan died, very clearly had a lot of work to do wrapping up everybody's individual plot lines to put them in the places that they needed to be to go into the final book. And it did feel a little bit rushed. It did feel a little bit unnatural in places, and things that would have been great reveals or plot points if they were interspersed throughout the series kind of felt gimmicky all coming at once in book 13. What I didn't realize though, while it was quite obvious what Brandon Sanderson was doing, I did not realize that that was because this entire thing was going to be a battle. And if y'all know me, you know that battle scenes are not my favorite. I love adult epic fantasy, even ones that are kind of like war heavy or war centric. I actually really love military fantasy, but the battle scenes themselves, especially when they're very typical swords and horses kind of stories, I lose interest, I zone out, and I cannot follow it. So for the most part, I was not having a great time with this book. It was actually a massive drag for me. There's obviously a couple of big things that happen in this book, but in terms of like plot reveals, revelations, anything that I was remotely interested in, this book did not have it. So was this my 2-star of the month? It was. This was my 2-star read of the month. I actually think in terms of the series as a whole, it is one of the least compelling that I've read so far. And for my final verdict, for those of you who have been waiting for me to sacrifice myself for you guys and finish the series so you don't have to tell you whether it's worth it, I honestly don't think it is. I do not generally read abridged books or abridged series. I do feel like Wheel of Time would benefit from an abridged version. There are a lot of great points in this series, a lot of points of high action, points of high emotion. To be fair, I feel like plot twists are light on the ground in this series, but I don't feel like the slow moments in between and how tedious and repetitive this series can be. The fact that we have 1,000-page books where we don't need them and the majority of them are closer to 1,000 than they are to like 500. I would say if you start this series and you read the first 3 books and you are not having a good time, don't continue, because you're not going to gain anything from it. I know that I definitely didn't. That's not true, actually. I did gain the knowledge of what has influenced a lot of other fantasy series, which is why I've been in Wheel of Time for the long haul. That is what I wanted to gain from it, if nothing else, through persevering. Like, it didn't get any better, is what I'm saying. Next up, I read a couple of super hyped young adult books from back in the day. The first one was The Kiss of Deception by Mary E. Pearson, which is a book that I have wanted to read for a very long time. It is one that was very, very popular when I started Booktube back in 2017, and I was waiting until the full series was released so I could have a full set of paperbacks that matched, and then I just never got around to reading it. So I'm really happy that I did manage to read this one in June. Not only was it a Patreon pick, it also came up for never shelve it or scrap it, which was great in terms of like my goals and what I try to achieve on a monthly basis. But this one is a young adult fantasy series following a princess who is running away from her wedding. So on the morning of her wedding with her handmaid, they flee to a neighboring town where they intend to start a new life for themselves. And two people set out after her looking for her, one of which is the prince that she was supposed to marry, the second of which is an assassin that has been sent by an enemy kingdom to kill her. Throughout the course of this story, she does not know which is which. She actually just thinks that these are normal guys. Like, she thinks one's a farmer and one is like something else. And we as a reader also don't know which is which. We know that there is a prince and that there is an assassin, but we only really know them by their names, and it's never clear which one is which until you get towards the end of this book. I'm very happy to say that I did enjoy this one. Maybe not as much as I wanted to or I anticipated enjoying, but I still had a really good time with it, and I gave it a low 4 stars. My main issue with this one is that I didn't really love the world building. I didn't know going into it, or I didn't expect this to be a fantasy that has a high percentage of magical content, but there is magic in this world. Our main character is a first daughter, which means that she's supposed to have a power that she doesn't think that she does, and she really feels like she's failed in her role as this first daughter. However, we find out throughout the course of the book that maybe she does have power, it's just manifested a little differently than she expected. And the magic is also deeply tied to the religion of this world, which as we venture further into this novel, we discover is maybe not what everybody thinks it is. Like, the way that the main character has been raised within the city have been preaching something about the religion, the historical figures, and the magic of this world that is not necessarily true. Now, I did enjoy that plot point and the way that we were heading throughout the book, but I feel like at the start of this, you don't get a really good grounding in what the main character currently believes about the magic and the religion. It's almost like because you're reading from the perspective of the main character who knows all about this world, that she doesn't feel the need to explain it to you because you're in her head and she knows it so well, if that makes sense, which is not my preferred way of world building. There is, at the beginning of the majority of the chapters in this book, we have a little paragraph which is from the holy text of the world and the city to kind of give us an inkling of what that law may be. But for me, because there's very little context to it, it doesn't really do much to give me a full picture of the equilibrium that we are going to be breaking within this series when we start to realize that the magic and the religion and everything is not as we originally thought it to be. In terms of like because obviously we've got a love triangle here, I did enjoy that playing out in a nostalgic way. I love a love triangle because it's so nostalgic to me, like it was in every single book back in the day. And I also really liked Mary E. Pearson's writing style. Where we left off in this series does leave me intrigued to go into the sequel, so I'm definitely intending to continue on with this. And with it being a young adult fantasy, I did think that it was quite an easy read, but not in a way where it felt like dumbed down or like the world was thin and insubstantial. Like, it felt like a good solid fantasy series, but with a little bit of a, I guess, easily digestible writing style that keeps you invested in the story. The second YA staple that I read in June was Caraval by Stephanie Garber. So this one is a circus story. It is about this carnival that travels, and it actually hasn't traveled for quite a few years because of mysterious reasons that people don't really know. There's a lot of like legends and rumors that surround Caraval, but we're following these two sisters, one of them specifically called Scarlett, whose father is abusive, and she really goes out of her way to protect her younger sister from the brunt of her father's cruelty. And she has been writing to Legend, who is the creator of Caraval, every single year asking him to travel to the island where she lives. Because Caraval hasn't been traveling in quite some time, and also because I guess Legend's a busy guy, her letters have gone unanswered. But one day, just before Scarlett is about to get married, Legend replies and invites Scarlett and Teller to join him on his private island to participate in a game of Caraval. Now, one of the reasons why this carnival is so special is because you can participate in it. It's like a competition, and the prize is normally something like your heart's desire. So Scarlett arrives at Caraval only really intending to observe, which is your other option. However, she gets swept up in the game of Caraval when her sister is kidnapped, and to be able to free her sister, she has to win the competition. There is a third character in here who is a sailor called Julian who takes the spare ticket that they were sent by legend and ends up assisting Scarlet in her mission to save her sister. However, Scarlet doesn't quite trust Julian and his motives. So this one is one that I was putting off for a very long time, honestly, because I didn't like The Night Circus, which is another really hyped circus book, and it kind of put me off circus stories because there is a certain level of whimsy attached to them, and I am not a whimsical girly. Like, fantasy containing whimsy, unless it is like a middle grade, is usually not for me. Like, I don't like magic that happens just because. I like magic that happens for a reason. And that being said, I did really enjoy Caraval, even though it does contain magic that happens just because. Like, just because it accentuates the atmosphere of Caraval, like strange and crazy things will happen. Scarlet throughout here is essentially on a scavenger hunt with everybody else who's participating in this game. And for me, some of the ways that she found the clues didn't quite make sense as somebody who likes to read books that have very concrete like rules and reasons for things happening. You kind of have to go with the flow on this one a lot. I don't really know why I enjoyed this one so much. It wasn't a perfect book. I gave it like a high 3 stars. It's like a 3.5. I thoroughly enjoyed my time reading it, but I don't feel like I was ever truly swept away by it. I did really like the atmosphere of Caraval. I liked the writing style, and Stephanie Garber's writing actually reminds me a lot of Marissa Meyer, who wrote one of my favorite series, which is the Lunar Chronicles that I read many, many years ago. And this specifically reminded me a lot of Heartless by Marissa Meyer, which doesn't hold a candle to the Lunar Chronicles, but it's one that I did read and enjoy. So I felt like the writing style was quite familiar to me, as well as the pacing actually, because I wouldn't call this a fast-paced book. The plot is constantly moving. It is definitely not a slow build at all. I would say the focus of this book is the plot as opposed to the characters, but it's not so fast that I felt like it was too chaotic and I couldn't follow what was going on. I do plan on continuing. I'm not super happy about the second book following Teller, who continuously frustrated me. I actually enjoyed all of the characters in here apart from Teller. She does these things that makes her sister feel terrible, and when it comes to it, when we get to the bottom of like her motivations for her actions, it's like, oh well, I did it for you, it was in your best interest. And I'm like, that doesn't really excuse doing such irresponsible things that like throw other people's lives into turmoil just because you did it with kindness in your heart. So I obviously believe that she has her redemption in book 2 and becomes a likable character because this is a popular series, and like I said, I will definitely continue. Just the thought of following Teller is not a particularly appealing one to me right now. My penultimate book for June was one that I was really excited about that I sadly did not end up loving, and that is The Daughter of the Drowned Empire by Frankie Diane Malice. This has been on my like immediate TBR since November, so I'm glad that I finally got around to it. And I was particularly excited about this because I knew that it was a fantasy romance story that was fantasy heavy with a pretty persistent romantic plotline in there as well, and I was so ready for that. And actually the most frustrating thing about this book for me is that typically recently, with a lot of recent fantasy romance books I've been reading, I have not been loving the romance, but maybe I've liked the writing style, maybe I've liked the plot, but the romance isn't doing it for me. In this one, I loved the romance, and it was the rest of the book, it was the fantasy, it was the plot that didn't work for me, and that was just so incredibly frustrating. But let's wind it back a bit. This one is about a girl who is a princess. She's actually the third in line for the throne, but the throne of this kingdom is typically held by a woman. However, when the main character's mother died, she willed the throne to her husband instead of to her aunt. Now, this has created a lot of conflict in the world because the people are very used to having a female ruler. They consider this male ruler weak. They don't like him. Lots of soldiers from neighboring kingdoms have had to come into this land to help shore up their borders, and they don't think that the current leader is helping to build a strong country. So there is like a rebellion bubbling under the surface, but we also have different types of magic in this world. When you come to a certain age, you have to declare yourself as either a mage or a soldier. I think the soldiers are potentially called, is it Sotori? And when that happens, they release the binding spell that is placed on every citizen to bind their power, and a big rush of power leaves them and kind of reveals what their power is. And there is a forbidden magic in this world called Vorak, which is telekinesis, telepathy, and visions. And if you have one of these powers, if it's revealed when the binding spell is released, well, executed, you're taken and executed. And right at the very beginning of this book, our main character sees this happen to her cousin. Her father then takes her and her sisters aside and tells them that they do have Vorak ability abilities in their blood, and that he is helping them to control their powers during these ceremonies so that they are not discovered. The problem is though, is that having these powers can be quite debilitating, and it is debilitating for the main character's older sisters. So when she goes into her own ceremony, she's expecting to have this Virak power revealed. However, when they release her binding power, they find out that she has absolutely no power to speak of at all. This is unheard of in this world because everybody has a magical ability, either the forbidden one or the one that's perfectly acceptable. And so some people who are politically working against her kingdom try to have her exiled. However, their exile law is commonly only applied to criminals, which doesn't work in this case. So eventually they kind of decide that that is a little unfair, and they send her to the Sotoria Academy to train as a soldier. Now, this is a girl who has never lifted a weapon in her life. She's been training her entire life to become a mage, and so she's kind of thrown in at the deep end. A lot of people don't want her there. A lot of people resent her father, and she has 7 months to prove herself as a magical warrior without any magic. And the person that she is given to train her is an exile from a different kingdom who has been allowed into her kingdom, but that also is a little bit taboo and shouldn't have happened. So these two outcasts in this academy are kind of thrown together. The thing that I didn't really enjoy about this, I gave it 3 stars because I did really enjoy the romance, which of course is between the main character and this guy who's training her. She does actually have a boyfriend who is a walking red flag and a wet lettuce. Like, he is a pathetic sniveling noble who is such a stickler for the rules that he just never has our main character's back, and he just massively gives me the ick. But the world for me, while containing a lot of interesting concepts, like the way that they travel in this world is on the back of giant birds, and all of these little cool elements of the world were really striking, but they never really came together for me to create a full picture. Like, it felt very disjointed. I didn't have a good image of the world. I didn't feel like atmospherically it really allowed me to sink into it. I don't think there's any description of like the architecture in this world, and as somebody who is a visual reader, if you're creating this high fantasy world that is very different from our own, then I need these little details to be able to build a picture, to be able to fully get invested in the story. Because if I'm confused about the world, I can't really sink into the plot because I don't have a backdrop for it to be set on, if that makes any sense. I also didn't really like the main character. I felt like she was constantly described as being super bright and super smart, but at every opportunity, like, she needed everything explaining to her in a really broken down kind of repetitive manner for her to get the point, which I gave an example of in the vlog where I read this, which was really frustrating. And I also feel like the way that she regards her boyfriend, who is somebody who I never got the impression that she was ever that into him. Like, the chemistry between her and the actual love interest and her and this guy is vastly different, but she also has spent 2 years being withdrawn from him because he does believe in this system. Like, he believes that people with the Virak should be punished, and obviously she knows that that includes her sisters. And there's multiple points throughout this book where she keeps reminding herself, like, oh, he will never accept my family. Like, at the first opportunity he has, if he discovers who they are, he will turn them over to be executed. And she gets to a point where she thinks that, like, maybe there's potential for him to change, then realizes that, oh no, like, he's never going to change, he's always going to feel this way, and continues to date him, gets reinvested in their relationship. And for me, it just never felt believable because I never felt any kind of chemistry or real emotion between them. There was no reason for her to have such blinders on towards this man who she just really was not that into. Whereas the love interest, on the other hand, I mean, that was a great time, and I'm actually so sad that I'm not going to be continuing on with this series because the romance is a slow burn. Like, there's nothing really that happens between them in this book, but you know that it's going to happen in the future, and I almost want to continue on for that alone. But I just don't really feel like the fantasy, which is the dominant element of this book, which typically I love, was executed in a way that I can ever really enjoy this series, and I'm really sad about it because I really thought this was going to be a new favorite for me. And then the final book that I read was the one from Audible, which was Dungeon Crawler Carl by Matt Didiman. Now, this is a book and a series that everybody is loving right now, and I am sadly not everybody. I didn't give it 5 stars. I did very much enjoy it, but I did not fall in love with it the way like I feel like a lot of people have. This one is a lit RPG, which if you don't know what that is, it's kind of a book that mimics a video game. So imagine you're playing World of Warcraft and your character in World of Warcraft knows that they are in a game. So they can see their quests, they can see their mini-map, they can level up and they can gain skills, and they are aware that they are doing this, but you're reading the story from their perspective. Now this takes it to a different level, I feel, than the one lit RPG I tried in the past, which I DNF'd. Now the reason why I DNF'd that, it had a great audiobook like this series does, and I started off really enjoying it, but I thought it got quite repetitive with like the level up, you have a new achievement, like all of that stuff like constantly recurring throughout the book, kind of got repetitive to me, and I ended up DNFing it in the end. Dungeon Crawler Carl is a little bit different because it's set in our world following this guy called Carl whose girlfriend is cheating on him. Now she's on a trip with this other man, and this is the point where he's discovered that she's cheating, and he is sat at home with her cat, which is this like award-winning show cat. I'm pretty sure she's like a Persian, and he has decided that he's not going to smoke outside anymore because his girlfriend has no respect for their relationship, so he has no respect for the apartment they share together, and he's been cracking the window because the cat hates the smell of the smoke. And one day at 2 a.m. he's just sat in his pants having a cigarette, and the cat leaps out the window. So he goes out to get her in pink Crocs, a leather jacket and underpants, and the buildings around him, all of the buildings of the earth, just collapse into the ground, killing everybody who was within them. There is then this ominous voice that comes from nowhere telling him that he now has 2 choices. He can either survive on the surface of the earth. They're in the middle of a winter storm though, it's snowing, and there's obviously no shelter anymore, but he's offered the opportunity to just survive on the earth's resources, or he can go into the stairwell that goes beneath the ground and participate in this intergalactic game show of survival. So he chooses the latter option. He picks up his cat, Princess Donut, and he goes down into these tunnels where he starts to participate in this game show. So this book is part Hunger Games, part Ready Player One, I would say is the best way to describe it, with the dungeon obviously in place of the arena in the Hunger Games, and then Ready Player One is like the video game aspect of this. It does have humor, which I know I was concerned whether the humor would work for me, and I feel like for me the humor did. It's kind of like not 50-50, more like 75-25, like 75% of the time like it's quite funny. It's a little bit on the nose, which isn't my preferred type of humor, but we do have some sarcasm in there as well, which is my preferred type of humor, and it works for me in the most part. And I definitely feel ingesting this in an audio format, the humor is brought to life a little bit more, it's a little bit more dynamic. It does still have the repetitive elements of a lit RPG, and I do feel like it can also be a little bit info dumpy in parts. That was less of an issue in book 1 because that was really just an introduction, and as Carl is in the earlier levels of this dungeon, like the game isn't that complicated. You kind of get to grips with the premise and then off he goes. An issue that I had with this, one of the main reasons I didn't give it 5 stars, is that I do find it to be a little bit male gazy in parts. Regarding the humor and the tone of this, it is like a funny romp through a dungeon, but it also has a lot of critique on the real world and also a little bit of satire. And the male gaze I don't think is supposed to be taken super seriously in the way that it was in like, it was predominantly I want to say like the 70s and the 80s, but the inclusion of it I don't particularly love. Like there's a talk show host in here which also leans into the Hunger Games element of it. The real focus of the host is how massive her boobs are, which I do feel like is supposed to be satire, but I still don't appreciate it, if that makes any sense. I do enjoy the general critique in comparison to the real world though. Like some of the bosses that they face are called, one of them in particular is called the Juicer, who's a gym bro, and I like that twist on real life and how it's been converted into this dungeon. So overall, like I had a really good time with it, would definitely recommend the audiobook. It's not quite a 5-star read for me, and I'm actually almost halfway through the second book now as well. I'm enjoying that one slightly less because it is going really hard on the exposition in a way that's almost making it indigestible. But overall, I am having a really good time with the series, and I personally really love a well-produced audiobook, which I feel like is its main appeal for me. So those were all of the books that I read in June. I did also get over halfway through Sunbringer by Hannah Kana. I'm 196 pages into this now. Essentially in the second half of the month month, I got derailed by a DIY project, which you may or may not have noticed in this video, which is how I ended up getting so far into Dungeon Crawler Carl, not only reading book 1 but also getting halfway through book 2. But it did take me away from my physical reading in the final like week and a half of the month, which is unfortunate because I wanted to get this in for June. And then also, like I said, I'm halfway through the second Dungeon Crawler Carl book already, which is Carl's Doomsday Scenario. So those are 2 books that you can expect to see in my July wrap up. I am traveling in July, which may impact how much I read. We'll have to see. It can truly go either way depending on what else is going on. But I do know my reading's going to take a hit, especially in the first week or so of the month, as I get all of my ducks in order to be able to go away for the week and keep my channel ticking over in the meantime. But down in the comments, please let me know what the best book that you read in June is. I can't decide if mine is Dungeon Crawler Carl or This Poison Heart. Both of them I thoroughly enjoyed, but for very different reasons and in very different ways. But if you guys would like to let me know you were here but you don't feel like you have anything to say, leave me a water emoji for the daughter of the drowned empire. But aside from that, guys, please don't forget to like this video if you liked it and subscribe if you wanna. If you head into my description box, you will find a link to my Goodreads, my Instagram, and my Patreon if you'd like to follow me on any of those. But that's it from me today, guys. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you will go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.